Linda Brown, on the left, and her sister, Terry Lynn, sit outside the racially segregated Monroe Elementary School in Topeka, Kansas in March of 1953. Their father helped launch the landmark Brown versus Board of Education lawsuit that led to school desegregation. Up until 1954, segregation was legal with access separate and unequal for black and white students. However, after repeated challenges from the NAACP, the Supreme Court ruled in 1954's Brown versus Board of Education that separate facilities were inherently unequal, and in one ruling, segregation became illegal. Well, sort of. School segregation was now against the law. States were ordered to begin desegregating their public schools, but changes were slow to come. While the Supreme Court ruled that segregation was now illegal, they didn't provide any guidance for leaders on how to implement this monumental heart and mind change or how to enforce it, so most of the schools did not desegregate. Even 10 years later, after the ruling in 1963, only 1.2% of blacks were integrated into Southern state schools. In fact, in 1963, not a single black student in Mississippi, Alabama, and South Carolina attended a school with white students. The primary focus of educational leaders during that era was to end legally sanctioned racial segregation in public education and implement school integration, at least in theory. Educational leaders were preoccupied with compliance or resistance to Brown versus Board of Education, and they were very busy managing social, political, and community backlash. They also wanted to preserve institutional stability during forced change while addressing equity versus local control. Importantly, much of the leadership energy went into how slowly or minimally desegregation could occur, rather than how to create genuinely equitable schools. Education philosophies of that era reflected those focus of those educational leaders. Equal education opportunities are not based on race or background. Education was seen as a tool to reshape society towards greater justice and democracy. Teachers switched from traditional chalk and talk methods to using puzzles, games, and stories to engage children. I was delighted when I read about that one. The federal legislation driving the era, we know about the Brown versus Board of Education, which declared separate but equal unconstitutional. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited discrimination in federally funded schools and allowed federal government to withhold funds. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 had massive federal funding tied to equity and poverty. This era represented the shift from state and local dominance to federal intervention in education and marked a major federal role in public education. Changes compared to the previous era where segregation was no longer legally acceptable. Equity was emphasized and education became political. Integration often meant that physical proximity without true inclusion. The view of student achievement and success during that era was that achievement was framed through equality of opportunities, not outcomes. Access and inclusion over academic outcomes. Standardized testing existed but was not dominant. Achievement was more about attendance and opportunity. In short, access equaled success, at least in theory. Between 1954 and 1965, student achievement was viewed through a legal and moral lens, not yet data-driven. Teachers were largely unprepared for integrated classrooms. There was minimal training in cultural competence, anti-bias practices, and trauma-informed instruction. Teaching remained gendered and underpaid, and black teachers and administrators were disproportionately lost their jobs due to school closures and consolidation. White teachers often retained authority and advancement. Teachers were viewed as moral agents but expected to maintain order, not challenge injustice. Advocacy was often discouraged or even punished. There were key national figures during this time. Thurgood Marshall, he was an NAACP attorney that led strategies in the Brown versus Board. of education. Earl Warren was the Chief Justice who authored the Brown decision. Martin Luther King Jr. He framed education as a moral and democratic imperative. Rosa Parks. She was a catalyst for broader civil rights activism. Malcolm X. He critiqued integration with empowerment. Lyndon B. Johnson. He was the president who signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and ESEA in 1965. He framed education as a key weapon in the war on poverty and expanded federal leverage over public schools. Key student figures, the Little Rock Nine. 9 black students integrating Central High School in 1957. Their experiences revealed the emotional cost of desegregation, forced the nation to confront resistance to Brown. And then Little Ruby Bridges, the first black child to integrate an all-white elementary school in the South, in New Orleans, in November of 1960. She became a living symbol of child bravery and federal enforcement. Her integration was a significant moment in the civil rights movement. Ruby was escorted by federal marshals for her safety during the process, and the event highlighted the challenges of desegregation in American schools. I want to focus, though, on key local North Carolina figures. These figures live on today. There are museums, and in our library, there's areas dedicated to these figures. One is Reverend Polly Murray, who was a legal scholar whose arguments influenced the Brown versus Board decision. She was an Episcopal priest and conducted race, gender, and education equality. And then there's Ann Atwell and Claiborne Ellis, known as C.P. Ellis. The two were thrown together in 1971 as co-chairs of a charrette, which was a series of long and intense meetings between a diverse group of people. The purpose of the charrette was to discuss school desegregation, still contentious issue. Many years later, this is 1971, and to draw up a series of recommendations to present to the school board. Considering their history of mutual animosity, Atwater and Ellis were reluctant to work together, but both knew that to have their opinion represented, they must participate, if this was going to, during this series of meetings in the summer of 1971. C.P. Ellis began to change. Sitting down with his nemesis, he realized that his struggles were her struggles too, and that they shared a fundamental commonality of experience. Ann Atwater, in an interview with the Carolina Times, expressed this sentiment. Mr. Ellis has the same problems with the schools and his children as I do with mine, and we now have a chance to do something for them. There certainly is no deep-seated love between Mr. Ellis and myself, but this school project brings out problems that we all have. We're going to have to lay down our differences and work together. This will be the first time 2 completely different sets of philosophies have united to work together for the goal of better schools. If we fail, at least no one can say we didn't try. Change did not come easy or suddenly, and the two faced ostracism, even death threats. C.P. Ellis had an especially difficult time during his life post-charrette, as he had lost his effectiveness in the conservative community, which he acknowledged in a toast on the last night of the charrette. Ultimately, the school board disregarded the proposals put forth by the charrette, but the friendship that C.P. Ellis and Ann Atwater established during that time endured, as did Ellis's change in attitude. C.P. Ellis, he was the Ku Klux Klan head guy, and he went on to organize labor unions for both blacks and whites. Ellis and Atwater spoke together about their experience at events around the country, and at C.P. Ellis's funeral in 2005, Ann Atwater delivered his eulogy. And it's such a wonderful story that there was a movie, a docudrama, that was made in 2019. I highly recommend it. It's called The Best of Enemies. If you haven't seen it, please watch it. It really helps you to understand the struggles of desegregation and what cities went through. And this is a city in Durham, North Carolina, that I moved to in 1975 and experienced desegregation for the first time after having grown up in an all-white community in Cincinnati, Ohio. So my view of what was good and pure in this era, well, human dignity was upheld when segregation in education was ruled morally and constitutionally wrong. Education was recognized as a civil right. And ordinary people demonstrated extraordinary courage. This era seemed to focus on belonging, opportunity, and human worth. What was broken or needed a drastic shift? Well, we lost Black educators. It was integration in name only. It lacked action and equity. A lack of a comprehensive plan for meaningful desegregation needed to be put in place, and it wasn't there. And Brown versus Board of Education may have changed the rules, but at this time did not change the game. I chose this era because this is the era that shaped me, that I grew up in. And I am so grateful that for these ordinary people who did extraordinary things and stood up for human dignity and for rights for all people. Thank you for letting me share.